Okay, thank you.
Next slide, please. So as you can probably imagine, the principal way that our circular economy ambitions are being supported is in the circular economy Routemap that we published in September of last year. And it really outlines a vision for how we think the West Midlands can become more circular by initially focusing on manufacturing, construction and food. Seeing as Louis isn't here, I think he was going to give an introduction to the circular economy, wasn't he? I'll try and do that as well. So I always love this diagram from Circular Flanders that I think outlines really well the kind of three types of economy. The circular economy is all about building an economic system that moves away from a take, make, waste approach on the left through a recycling economy, which we're probably in now, where materials are reused but are eventually discarded, and through to a completely closed loop system. But when we were producing the Routemap, we split into two phases. The first phase we did what we called a baseline analysis, where we did a combination of material flows. So we worked out what materials come into the region, who does what with them, and what happens to them afterwards. And we also did an asset mapping exercise as part of that. So what we found during that asset mapping stage, this is by no means exclusive, is that the West Midlands already has a number of strengths in the circular economy. As a region, we're not coming at the circular economy from a standing start, and we're in a really good place to be a national, if not international, example of how circular economies can be fostered and function at a functional economic geography level. I think what's great about these strengths is that they are truly cross sector. We have businesses, both large businesses and SMEs, that are already adopting circular practices in their approach to product design or product manufacture. And we've also got a lot of strengths in our universities and research centres as well that are providing that innovation that we'll need to exploit the opportunities of the future, thinking particularly in Wolverhampton, and in Birmingham, in Coventry, all things kind of electric vehicles, battery manufacture, recycling, etc. So then the second, after we'd done the baseline analysis, the second part of the Routemap was kind of extensive stakeholder engagement phase, where we worked. From that we decided to focus on manufacturing, construction, and food. These are three areas that are kind of strategically aligned to the West Midlands broader economic strategies, but they're also, through the material flows analysis, we worked out there three areas of significant resource and materials consumption in the region. So we think if we tackle these three big areas, the rest will kind of unlock itself, is the thought. And with great challenges come great opportunities to then create new jobs and economic growth through the adoption of circular processes, but also to upgrade the types of jobs that we have as we support the region to move towards a higher skilled, higher wage economy. And then there are also three areas of significant existing expertise as well. So I mentioned some of the construction and sort of battery manufacturer expertise we have, but then also in the third, in particular in regards to food, we have a really strong third sector that already operates in things like food redistribution and that sort of thing. Digital and data technologies are going to be key to implementing some of our ambitions in these sectors. We're looking into how we can support a AI facilitated industrial symbiosis program in the region, sort of help businesses commercialize their waste flows and close the kind of resource loop. And then also in food, where we're looking at how technologies like 5G can help us to better kind of capture and redistribute things like surplus foods at the moment. Potentially only a RAP report that was published last year concluded that as a country and as a region, we can easily double the amount of food that we redistribute through things like food banks. We just need the infrastructure there to actually track what food is available and how we can get it to people. So yeah. Sure. So that's all just kind of a really quick high-level overview of our activity. I was also asked then to dig down a bit further into one of our key initiatives, which is the Repurposing to Zero initiative. So this notion of what is repurposing or adaptive reuse, as otherwise No, it's really the process of taking a building and using it for adapting it to do a function that it wasn't designed to. So as a concept, it's linked to retrofit, but it's distinct in that when you retrofit a building, it does the same job you wanted it to, it just does it more efficiently. With repurposing, it's doing a completely different role. And if it can do it more efficiently as well, then that's always a win. We think that repurposing or building repurposing will help us to achieve some of our environmental targets by reducing the carbon emissions associated with the built environment sector. Around 80 to 90% of a building's carbon emissions are actually embodied in the structure of the building itself, and they don't get released, as it were, until you actually demolish the building and build something else on top of it. And then, as well as contributing to some of our environment aims, we think this can help with some of our more social targets as well. Thinking about the examples I've got on the screen, the Tate Modern, which is probably one of the better known examples of repurposing in the country, which is obviously a museum that used to be a power station. And then closer to home, where you've got the Telegraph Hotel in Coventry, that is a hotel that was repurposed from an office space. These are buildings that quite often have stood in communities for decades or potentially even centuries, and are fundamental to that sense of place in communities. So we think if we can keep building structures in place for as long as possible, then we kind of cement that sense of place. This initiative has come about as the result of a Triple Helix partnership. Obviously, the Command Authority is involved, also the Innovation Alliance, Sustainability West Midlands, the University of Wolverhampton and Aston University, as well as private sector partners. I think it really shows the strength of that kind of approach to something like this, that we have sort of in mind broken it down into phases, and different people in that partnership are more appropriate for delivering different phases of it. So at the moment, we determined that the public sector was going to be most effective at delivering this initial phase, which is why it's fallen on us. And as we then complete this and then move into hopefully more deployment phases, we can shift the focus of who delivers what. And it's funded by the West Midlands Innovation Programme. So some repurposing does happen in the West Midlands, but we think we can accelerate it and improve the uptake. So this initial phase is going to be around, firstly, a feasibility study to determine if our proposed approach is what is wanted in the region, what is needed in the region, and will work. After we've proven that concept, which hopefully we will be designing a repurposing framework, which we hope will sort of articulate what repurposing is, and provide some guidance to people that maybe aren't subject matter experts in how they can approach the repurposing of buildings that maybe they manage or own. And then alongside that, we'll be producing some informational motion graphics videos to support that framework. And then finally, just in terms of how people can get involved, we'll be running, as part of the feasibility study, we're running some workshops to, the best way to determine if it's feasible is to talk to people that would be using it. So we'll be doing some demand workshops. Then hopefully after we've got that proof of concept, we'll be doing some kind of more focus groups on the design of the framework itself, what it needs to include, how it's best accessed by people, how stakeholders see themselves best interacting with this concept. And then also, depending on what organisations you represent, you might wish to actually tender for the work as well. So we're currently out for tender for the framework and feasibility study elements of the work. Any or all of those might be of interest. I think that is everything from me. That's my email address. Anyone who that's hurt any interests, give me just drop me an email. Happy to have a further chat or meeting.
Thank you very much, Jordan. And I will, in the email that I send as a follow-up to this meeting, make sure that you all have the link to that tender that Jordan mentioned, so you can share that with your networks or apply for it if it would be relevant for you. And then again, I think Jordan shared his email address here, and so we'll make sure that's in the email so that if you have questions about repurposing to zero or want to get involved in those demand workshops or focus groups, you've got the means to do that. Shall we open the floor up to some questions? I have a couple, so if nobody has a burn, oh, Ian's got one. Wonderful.
Could you just let us know the timeline, the anticipated timeline on that?
On the repurposing. So we're hoping to have someone in place by sort of the start of sort of mid-May probably, and then be doing the workshops over the summer, June, July time, with the framework designed by August, September. And then once we've got that framework and that feasibility study, we can then go back to the sort of broader partnership and work out who's best to take it forward from there. Thank you.
Brilliant. And David.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. That was very useful. I want to go back to the first part of your presentation, the general level. One of the most important ingredients into making this happen is people. And it's kind of on my mind because I spent 10 years looking after the chemical engineering profession, which is an area that's obviously crucial to circular economy. And the purpose of the meeting I was in this morning, amongst other things, was to lament the lack of young people going into that discipline in universities. Numbers have fallen, as they have in many parts of engineering. We've had a skill shortage in areas like this for many years in the UK, and certainly for at least as long as I've been involved in this sort of game, which is between 15 and 20 years, there's been an exceptionally strong shortage in the West Midlands. So what I'd like to see is how we're going to make sure we've got the people, the talent at all levels that we need to make this good stuff happen.
Yeah, so I think there's probably two ways that as a command authority we're trying to do that. Firstly, on a broader level is our behaviour change work. So we have a behaviour change strategy that part of that is around trying to raise awareness for people to get into fields that will be beneficial for our environment over the coming years. And then kind of more focused as well, we're currently working with our skills team to produce a green skills strategy for the region, how we can pivot some of our adult education budget into things like repair focused T-levels, I suppose, and that sort of thing. So we're working with our skills team at the moment. I think that will be, the body of that work will happen over the summer in time for September time.
Something else to note with that is that, as Jordan mentioned, the repurposing to zero is one example of what we call the triple helix partnership: private sector, public sector, and academia coming together. And the innovation program for the first 3-year pilot that's nearly wrapped up has really focused on building those sorts of partnerships and collaborations. And I suppose I say this as a personal thing, not as an Innovation Alliance representative thing, but I really do see that bringing university together with public sector and private sector starts those informal conversations that then start to lead to policy changes. So there is excellent work happening across the region, and there is, of course, also frustration that it's not moving as quickly as we would all like. So it's that tension, and the skills team here really is doing a great job of figuring out how to manage all of that. So over the summer and then into the autumn, you should be seeing quite a few more pieces of information about how to move that forward. And in the construction sector specifically, unfortunately, again, Louis isn't here today, but he has been doing some work in that area for the construction sector. So really engaging young people. So through further education and higher education, and then also going into, what do you call them, sixth forms, A-levels? Sixth forms as well. So if that's of interest, then Louis would definitely be a good person to get in touch with, and his email address is in his slides. So that's just something to keep a note for the construction sector, looking at sustainable construction specifically and the skill shortage there. I realize we've got one question from Charlie Hopkirk online, so we'll jump to the virtual, and then Malcolm will jump to you after that. So Charlie, over to you.
Hello. Firstly, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, cool. Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, I really like the Routemap, as we've spoke before. My first question was going to be about the link across to the skills piece and some of these Routemap flyers and stuff that are being completed by the CA. So that Louis, what was the doctor called? Sorry, his presentation sounds interesting in relation to Sean Hall's construction task force as well, which is all about getting kind of the big players, but also SMEs represented and looking at skills in construction. So there's, I think there's good join across there in terms of the future skills. And then maybe not completely relevant to today, but yeah, be keen on a further conversation, Jordan, around the manufacturing piece of the Routemap. I think there's loads of potential there and a lot of really good assets and people that we've been speaking to in the region that are keen on closing that loop. So we export a load of scrap from metals and materials, and as you know, we run a metals and materials forum that brings together some of those trade bodies and universities. So yeah, we've spoken to Warwick Manufacturing Group, Materials Processing Institute up in the northeast, and others that are really keen to kind of get something moving on this. So yeah, I'd be keen to understand more once it comes along, the manufacturing piece and how we can kind of support the CA in their, I suppose, broader in terms of the devolution deal, etc. How we can support activity in that space.
Sure. Yeah, so we've literally just started work on an industrial symbiosis program that I'll drop you an email about. And then also industrial decarbonisation is one of our work streams for the Trailblazer devolution deal. So sort of an emerging set of asks around that I can link you into as well.
Cool, cheers.
Thank you. And Malcolm?
Yes, just coming back to the follow-up from David's question about the first part of your presentation. I mean, the industrial symbiosis is not a new concept at all. I mean, it's been going for a long time, and indeed, I mean, I can't remember his name now, but I mean, the company in Kings Norton, you probably know well. I mean, I remember going there when I was a member of the European Parliament, probably about 15 years ago, for a workshop with people bringing their ideas about exchanging waste products. I mean, you know, so I'm just wondering, what I mean, are we exploiting the background knowledge that's already there? I mean, that company actually, because I was involved with them, rolled out a number of industrial symbiosis processes in other European countries, something that is not actually very apparent here. So, I mean, we seem to be a bit behind the game on this. But my observation is that in the West Midlands, we do seem to have, if I'm correct, that's still operating, a sort of kernel of knowledge and activity that we could build on in that area. And I was just interested to know whether that was something that you were following up on. So that was a sort of more general question, and I think it relates very much to what David said, because I think that within the universities, I mean, the whole sort of subject matter around industrial symbiosis and the techniques and tools involved ought to be something that we should be actually training people to do. And one of the things we could think about would be actually supporting some activity in that area in terms of developing skills training programs. You know, I mean, that's what I would have thought was a sensible investment for us to make. I mean, coming back to your repurposing buildings, if I could, you didn't really make, because I hadn't actually seen this before, and I'm interested in it, but I didn't get an idea about what the digital component of this is. I mean, you plot that in there, but I mean, we are talking about you know, physical infrastructure and architecture. I mean, are there some specific digital tools that you had in mind? And I mean, it's all very well actually, you know, developing one of those tools, but actually we are looking for live projects and money to fund the live projects. And many of these may well involve sort of commercial buildings and commercial investors. So, I mean, my real question about the focus of that is, I mean, are we bringing into that grouping you know, the commercial property investors who will potentially be the sort of people who could invest in those? I mean, for example, there are lots of property investors. There are portfolios of investment. The universities have money in a charity properties fund, for example, you know, which is investing in these sort of projects. So it seems to me that digital may all be very well, but actually we're looking for sources of the money, aren't we? And how much focus are you going to be putting on that?
Sure. So yeah, two things there. In terms of the industrial symbiosis, I think the company you're referring to is probably International Synergies.
International Synergies.
Who are the company that we're currently working with in developing that program. So yeah, it's really trying to build on that existing knowledge. You're right, it's not a new idea, and it's one of those things where I think in this sector a lot of the time we already know the answers. We just have to find the resource to do it. So part of that work is helping us make a business case and a narrative that we can use when we talk to people like Bays and DEFRA. In terms of the repurposing framework, I think our vision for the framework is a potentially sort of interactive tool that can assist people in applying for funding, particularly, I suppose, public monies. We've spoken to a couple of people in sort of the cultural sector that have buildings that they want to repurpose, but they A, don't know how to approach it, and B, don't know how to approach it in a way that will look good on a sort of SBF, ERDF type funding application. So yeah, and a lot of the answers to those questions, I suppose, are we don't know yet. Part of the work that we'll be doing is working out what is actually needed and what information will be needed as part of that framework. But yeah, I'd be happy to kind of have you involved in any work we did do.
Do we have any other questions either in the room or online?
There's a couple more people just arriving.
Ah, we have a couple more people joining us. Hello. Welcome, welcome.
So,
Just take a seat wherever you're.
thank you.
I'd go down that end.
Oh, actually, yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, we're late.
No worries, no worries. Just going to hand over to Alison Kilby in just a moment.
Sure.
Would you like me to run your slides?
Yeah, or I can click whichever's easier.
Whichever you prefer. I'm happy to. Is the next one? It should be the next one.
Okay.
It might be the one after the next one. No, there you go.
There we go. Okay, so as it says on the screen, I'm Alison Kilby and I work for Arup. I lead our mechanical team doing buildings design. And the reason I'm here today is to talk about the role of smart technology in reducing the operational carbon of buildings. We've got a little bit of extra time, so just to sort of throw back to what Jordan's been saying, the viewpoint that I'm coming to talk to you about is the fact that Arup are moving from an out-of-town business park into the city centre, and we obviously had to look for an opportunity within the city centre. When we approached the market back in 2017, I think there were 2 refurb opportunities presented by developers to us. Unfortunately, we did a lot of research and test fits and they weren't suitable for the scale of business that we had. The floor plates were too small. We'd have been over like 10 floors. But I'm working with another client right now who's gone out to tender for a pretty similar size space, and actually most of the opportunities are refurbs because that's what the market's demanding. That's what they want. That's what we wanted. We just couldn't get it back in 2017. So I think the money will come because the demand is there. You know, developers are willing to put more money in to more difficult projects. So as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, this is the Paradise development, and Arup as designers have been involved with MEPC and Argent, who are the developers, on this site for over a decade. It's a 7-hectare site, previously home to City Library, BCU Conservatoire, a hotel and various other buildings. So it's quite a complex site. And we had to do a lot of work to identify, quantify and mitigate risks of building on that spot in town, and help plan the demolition and all of the enabling works to generate this development of commercial and other buildings within that site. As you can imagine, quite a lot went into it. Back in 2017, we started the design of this building, Centenary Way, which actually spans over the tunnels of the A38. It's just celebrated its topping out ceremony, so most of you will have seen it on the Birmingham skyline, and it's the tallest commercial building on the site. And the direction from MEPC from the beginning was that it was a unique building, different to anything else that's on the site. So there's a steel exoskeleton, which is quite unique within the Birmingham landscape. And it's obviously a complex site because it's over the tunnels. We've got some massive trusses that support the building across the span of the tunnel. And it's a very complex site construction wise, because obviously we weren't allowed to stop the traffic at any point during the construction, so deliveries and things have been quite complex. But I'm not here because we designed a building. I'm here because we are also the first confirmed tenant of that building. So when we went out to market, there wasn't a building that represented the vision that Arup had for their office in the city centre. We wanted to move from a business park. We are in a naturally ventilated building, big win, that everyone has to drive to. Definitely not a big win. You know, most of our carbon emissions were from the transport to the site. So moving to a city centre site was a critical part of that vision to reduce our impact in terms of travel. But we wanted a building that really resonated with Arup and our sustainable direction. And having had the relationship with MEPC or Argent, we felt that this building, we could work with them to ensure it was low carbon, it was smart, and that's why we've ended up signing. So once we signed up, we said, right, well, we'll take space in this building, and the buts were quite big. It was designed, like I said, in 2017. The world was very different in 2017. This building was designed to have gas-fired boilers. You wouldn't design that now, but this was 2017. So we said, but we want those gone. So we have contributed as a tenant, and the developer has contributed to switch that design out. So they'd already started construction, but they adapted the building to replace the gas-fired boilers with air source heat pumps to do not only the heating, but also the domestic hot water loads of that building, which obviously enables us to have a chance of getting to net zero for our operation as the grid balance changes. And we've halved the expected operational carbon, you know, even with the current carbon kind of factors. So that decision, I think the landlord took quite easily, because he was making that decision for his new buildings anyway. It's a sensible decision for this building. But the other thing that we worked with Argent to do is to enable the building, to smart enable the building. The concept is that it is a bespoke system, but each of the systems that go into the building operate as they would, and a series of gateways enable those systems to talk to each other and provide their data back to a cloud or any common platform. So that data can be accessed via the web. It's not bespoke, it's data. Basically, we're enabling the data from the systems that are installed to get back to anywhere. And it doesn't really matter at this point where. The contractor was on board with that because it's a separate contract. Someone provides those gateways. Someone comes in and sorts out a naming convention and does the kind of smart commissioning after PC. So it's a standalone package almost, that this smart enablement piece is, just like you'd have the air handling unit package, you'd have the plasterboard package, you can have a smart package. So it's an extra, and it's not a cheap extra, but we've worked together to add this enablement to the building. Now, we had to convince the developer to do that, and I think some of the benefits probably are more evident now than they were back in 2019-20 when we were pushing this through with the developer, and that's around the saleability of the building. Even if a tenant isn't going to use it, the fact they've moved into a smart building sounds great, doesn't it? So they'd like that. You know, some people will be willing to pay more rent for a smart enabled building, which gives them data. It's scalable for the developer. So putting this backbone into the first of their buildings means they've got that infrastructure ready and the systems ready and the conventions ready to extrapolate that to further buildings on the Paradise development. It also means, from a pure FM basis, that maintenance of the landlord plant is based on data. You don't replace filters every 6 months. You replace filters when they're dirty, and before they get too dirty that the fan power goes up and you're using more energy. So there are proper cold hard cash benefits to the developer. And for us as a tenant, what was really important is partly that smart just wasn't there as a word. You know, you can go into the most smart building in the world, but if it doesn't improve your user experience, then you've not hit the nail on the head. you've not used it to your benefit. So what we've done is go through and create a series of personas which look at how we use the building and see how we can interface with the smart to improve each of those experiences. As simple as, how do you get into the building? You know, we've all come in today and got a QR code. We've got that, we can get out of doors to toilets. That wasn't the technology that was around, so we need all of those features, and we'll be able to, in a smart building, you might know where that person is. You know, this will be a unique code for me, and I'd know when I'd left, and you can log it all for fire and things like that. So for Arup as a tenant, some of the benefits are that the building can flex to suit our needs, and we can really understand our building. So from a uniquely Arup point of view, understanding how much power different parts of the building are using, how different heating set points can affect the amount of energy consumption, is really important for us as a research kind of organisation, that we've got that data to share with our clients. But even from a true user experience point of view, and not looking at what our job is, we can turn off the third floor on Mondays and Fridays. You know, why would we heat or cool the third floor when we know that our occupation is going to be low on a Monday and Friday? If we, we'll have people counters. So if we're doing heat maps of different areas of the floor plate, and we see that one furniture type is constantly busy, we put more of that furniture type in, so that our staff gets the working experience that they need, and that can obviously keep growing. Again, maintenance based on data. You know, if we know that one meeting room is always in use, we might give that a lick of paint more often than we give a meeting room, the least popular meeting room. You know, we can put all of our maintenance against data rather than against luck. If we want to do a refit, we can look statistically at how many meeting rooms we can do in one go without causing a substantial detriment to our business. So we might guess that it's 4, but we'll have the data to back up how many to do at once. So things like that. And I think whilst there might not be all of the opportunities available at day one for carbon savings, we will be able to achieve a lot of carbon savings over time by adapting, taking the data we've got and using that to set targets and to set expectations really of how we want the building to perform. So, like I say, sensors mean data. We can dashboard that data, we can look at that data constantly. We can gamify it. We can say Department X only used this much power the week they were in that section. How did Department Y use twice as much? You can get teams to compete to lower energy and really give them true values of how they're performing. We can track trends, excessive use. Why are the fan coil units in the bottom right hand of the corner of the building always running? What is it that's causing that difference in performance? And I think, like I said before, in terms of patterns of usage, we can close off parts of the building if they're not needed. We could maybe turn down the cooling to certain meeting rooms if we know that on a Wednesday there's just not as many meetings for whatever reason. Let's not cool all the meeting rooms, and we'll direct people to the ones that are working. And it's all about the patterns, responding to patterns, setting improvements and setting systems up to reduce wasted energy and wasted resource by interrogating and interpolating that data. So, in summary, we're in a unique position, both being the designer of the base build system and the tenant. And believe me, the Chinese walls are very complicated when I'm client side, and I've got colleagues that are developer side. But we're also quite a unique company in terms of coming into a building like this and requesting all of this stuff. But we've been able to demonstrate to MEPC and Argent just how important this stuff is and how much it can benefit them. And they are taking this forward for other buildings. They've not gone, we'll just do that for that one because they're a difficult tenant and leave them alone. They've carried this on throughout future projects. So I think it really is permeating the market. I think we'll see more and more buildings that are smart enabled. and that obviously have a much more sophisticated interaction with that energy and carbon use, because I think it's becoming more important to everybody, to users, to occupiers. And I think that's it from me. If there's any questions.
Alison, when does that building open?
So practical completion of the building is in December 2022.
Okay.
And then we have a fit out, so we will be in by October 2023.
Okay, very nice.
Once we don't publicise that.
Okay.
No, but that's pretty much when we're targeting to be occupied. So.
Sorry, we were just a bit late coming in there. Could I ask, why did you move from Solihull? Because that was, I remember the opening of Solihull, and Peter Braithwaite, very wonderful man, seemed to be really very environmentally friendly and so on.
It would have been, absolutely, and I think there were expectations that better transport links would be provided to that business park as it grew, and they really haven't come off. So we now put on bus services from the local rail line in Dorridge for our staff. But although that's better, to make it flexible for our staff, we're putting on, a single decker bus that's sometimes got 3 people on it. Well, as much as you're saving carbon, you're not. And to be honest, it's the scope 3 transport emissions of that building that meant we couldn't extend that lease. That is one angle. The other point is that our clients, our collaborators are in the city. And so for us to have better engagement with the city and get involved with initiatives like you guys are working on, it's really key to be in the city. If we did an event like this in Solihull, you guys wouldn't come. It's a long way, so we want to be involved. We want to be involved in a more diverse community. We want to help the community and to help areas that need help. I think in suburban Solihull, more of our work experience students, well, my dad was an engineer or my uncle's an engineer. We want to get work experience candidates and schools in that haven't got a clue, that have never had that exposure to STEM in the way that we can offer. So one of the spaces that we've got in the city, we've got a ground floor, effectively a shop front. So what was a retail unit will be Arup's front door. And that's a really unique thing that other tenants don't have, that we want to use to create community benefit. So we'll have CV workshops and real community engagement within that space, and make it as transparent as we can for people to be able to walk in and see things that we're doing, and exhibitions and various other things that go on in that ground floor space, and not say you've got to have a pass to get through this door. You've got to be not quite in a suit, because we don't quite go there anymore, do we? But we want to be permeable. We want people to benefit from us being in the city centre as much as we're benefiting. So quite a few reasons, but mainly about the cars and the car park.
I remember the one that you had in Cornwall Row, which was a very beautiful building there as well.
Yeah, no, we like a good building.
Yeah.
David, yes.
Yeah, thanks for that. A comment and a question. The comment is that I've always felt that people who design out buildings should be required to live and work in them. I think it would dramatically transform architecture. But the question, and I'd like to put your question on its head, if I may. I live near Blythe Valley. I live in Dorridge. I can't even walk there safely because Solihull Council can't provide a footpath. So I understand the issues. Public transport to there is a disgrace.
Yes.
Yes, you're quite right. And it will be interesting to know what is being done about that sort of issue. Separate question. But my question is, if we were to put all this tech into buildings on sites like Blythe Valley, would that make them viable? Or is the model of out-of-town business parks dead?
I don't think the model of out-of-town business parks is dead if you get it right. If there had been the infrastructure around out of town. I think, especially with the pandemic, the ability to just drop in to a meeting space, or have the IT or the help and the collaboration space near your home. For you to pop from Dorridge to Blythe Valley is far easier than into town.
Actually, it isn't, because
Well, I know, but
it is a very dangerous narrow lane if I walk or cycle along it.
yes, absolutely.
And if I drive, I'm getting the car out to drive 1.25 miles. It's one that.
Yeah. So if the infrastructure's right, and I suppose it depends on the nature of your work as well. So there are some businesses that are going to be more at home, and they will need space for that collaboration and meetups, and those could be out of town, to take some of that growth away from the city centre. But I don't think the model's dead, but I think there will be significantly more onus on getting the model right at day one, rather than, we put faith in the fact that those services would follow us as we came in, but the types of development that went on at Blythe Valley, we've now got quite a lot of sheds, so big space, not many people. It doesn't warrant the demand for the bus service, and therefore once an hour just doesn't quite cut it.
Can you talk about, sorry.
That's right, you go first, please. Could everybody introduce themselves, by the way, Devon?
That's next on my agenda, yes. We're going to do a round table in just
I'll
a second.
do that when sorry, I should have thought about that. Okay.
Sorry, was that your
I
question?
said ladies first.
Oh, ladies first.
Sorry, I didn't see you.
So we
Sorry.
want to hear from more people. John, let's speak.
Can you talk about the technology? I mean, how readily available is this? So what kind of technology is doing the measuring, and how does it work?
So I'll be absolutely honest, we're almost at the point of starting to look at which sensors and which people counters we're putting in. The issue is, if we decide it today, it's going to be like a whole different set of things on the market in a year's time. All of the technology that we're looking to introduce exists. So that's why we're coming about it from a use case perspective first, so that we're currently at stage 3 design, so kind of the detailed design, but not the full technical detail. And so we want to say what we want the system to be able to do, and then in a couple of months we'll have to nail it's going to be sensor X from manufacturer Y that does this. But at the moment, all of that technology exists. The people counters at the moment are kind of similar to that. I think that's a Wi-Fi router over there, but a big bulb thing that looks, it's not the best looking thing yet, but they're going to get smaller, and they're going to get, more, they'll blend a lot better than they currently do. So that we're not actually pushing the technological boundaries so much as just trying to incorporate the right kit in the right place to give us the outcomes that we want. There's some people counters that we put in our London office that literally tell you where people are within a meeting room. We don't think we need that. We need to know if there are people in the meeting room and if they're well utilised. So if you've got an 8-person room, does it always have 2 people in? Because then you've built the wrong size room. But you don't need to know whether they're sitting on the left or the right, kind of. So we are working on, based mainly on our London office, and our Edinburgh office has just been fitted out, trying to take those case studies effectively and consolidate all of that information to make sure we get an even better example in Birmingham in 2023.
Who's holding this data, and what the use of this data could potentially bring apart from energy use? So I kind of see like a red bulb going up and collecting all this data about people.
There is a lot of data, and Arup will own that data. And Arup will own some of the data for our space, and the landlord will own some of the data for their landlord kits. But there is definitely been an understanding of collaboration on that. So if we publish a paper, and we will publish stuff, for the public record that says incorporating this has saved this, why wouldn't the developer want their name on that? Because, and frankly, even if it doesn't work, even if we say, do you know what, measuring this showed that what we ballpark thought was right, that's still a record, that's still an achievement to know that we guessed about right before. But now we've got it statistically and database kind of controlled, and we will happily share data any group or, you know, universities that want to do research into things, you know, I think that'd be a really good way to collaborate and kind of get best use out of what we're trying to do.
That's an interesting question that you've asked about data and who will hold it, because our last Smart Places working group meeting was about data and cybersecurity and looking at how that functions. I know we do have a cybersecurity person in the corner of the room, so I'd be curious, Wayne, if you have any thoughts you wanted to contribute to that from a smart buildings perspective of cybersecurity.
It is an interesting question. I suppose it depends on how much PII, you know, personally identifiable information is being held, right? So if you're capturing who the person is as they enter the building, and then you're tracking them around the building, and then you're, you know, there's a need to you know.
We're not going quite that big, brother. Just to say.
There's a need.
We did discuss that, and it was deemed inappropriate to know how long someone had been in the loo for, type thing.
I mean, there are data controls that need to be put in place, right? And then there's data obfuscation that needs to occur if the data is being shared, right? Because it's great that it's open data and anyone can have it. I don't like the idea of people knowing how many buildings opening.
No, our data would be 312 people on the first floor, 16 of them sat here, 250 people on the second floor, 7 of them went into that meeting room. We aren't looking at collating personal data. We will have a fire log, so when you come in the building there will be a separate bit of data that goes, these are the people that are in the building, so there's like a roll call, but yeah, that data probably wouldn't be shared. But in terms of energy and carbon data, that's the data that we'd happily.
I still think it's interesting, right? Because there's kind of like assumed PII. So if I go on LinkedIn, right, and I go and look at all the people who work at Arup, who like live and work in the West Midlands, I've got a list of your staff, right? And then I kind of like that against your data of who goes in which building. I kind of started mapping those two data sets together, right? And I only need a few more identifiers and I can tell you who it is.
It's a real issue. I'm just trying to think what Amazon, for instance, take one abusive employer, arguably, would do with this sort of capability. And I think that worries me.
Yes, I think it could be very big brother, you know, if you wanted it to be, and if you weren't, you know, we have a very open culture in Arup, a very trust-based culture, and that's not the same in all organisations. And I think there's a legal need to be respectful of data, but there's also a moral kind of need and a kind of.
It's really interesting space, right? Did any of you guys see work.com? So you know Salesforce. So during the pandemic, they built a system called work.com, and it was just sweet, right? Because it was all about tracking staff and people who come to buildings due to something innocuous like the pandemic. But the reality was it's a time and motion system, right? Yeah, it knows where you've gone, it knows what you've done, it knows who you've talked to, it knows how close you've gone to people, and you know, that's a very powerful data set. And of course, you know, the pandemic has been the singular biggest technical, you know, advancement driver since the internet, really. You know, because it's changed how everybody works and approaches work. And all of these companies, you know, I was at Bupa who were qualifying the use of work.com at the time, and you know, adopting this technology in a very blasé way, right? Because they just wanted to know, they wanted to answer the how do we deal with the pandemic without thinking about what is the data controller issue of this space. But I mean, you know, I kind of think it's one of those things where it's an evolving field, and we'll come across these issues and we'll back them back. It's all well and good saying but we're nice people, right? You know, Google's mission statement is, you know, do no evil or something, and I wouldn't trust them one job.
No, and I think we are lucky within Arup that there are voices from every perspective. So we will have a kind of, I think we will get a rounded view before any data is shared in a form that could be you know, data would definitely be shared in terms of a report, so that we've written generated based on the bit data. If actual data is being shared, then there will be a lot of checks and challenges put in place. But no, I understand your point, and I think we probably are under thinking about it at the moment, and we do need to give it a little bit.
I don't think it helps when, you know, your opening statement is it's open data and we share with everyone, because I mean I'm just, you know, paraphrasing what I heard you say, and you showed us that lovely diagram with all the boxes on, which I can't see from here because my eyesight is too poor. But when you said it's open data and we share it, it's kind of like, oh, that's interesting. What controls are on the data? What intelligence is in the monitors? What monitors are? I mean, if you're looking at a logging system, you will block pieces of data all the way through the chain.
Yeah.
And it's like, well,
I suppose
I'm
seeing the outputs of the data as shared more than the data itself. You know, from an engineering perspective, I'm talking about what the data has meant and what we have found from the data.
We're all engineers in this room, right? You know.
But I can see where you're coming from, that yes, I wouldn't want everyone in this room logging into that data and seeing that Arup aren't using a meeting room. But I would be willing to tell people that. Does that make sense? You know, kind of, so that it might be in the expression of language that I've used. But yeah, we'll need to make sure we're clear on that.
Also, you know, it's my field, right? So of course I'm gonna go into the weeds quick, and so.
That's all right.
So we've had Malcolm. Had you?
No, well, I mean, it's really interesting how this has triggered off a whole lot of dimensions. So first of all,
what's your name, please?
Yeah, I was about to introduce. Yeah, so I'm Malcolm Harbour. I was a member of European Parliament for this region for 15 years, which is where I came across and worked with international synergies. But I've now been working for 3 years now with the Connected Places Catapult. And I think there are a number of very interesting points that come out of the discussion so far. And I was aware of your move here because your head of office was at the launch of the West Midlands Economic Strategy document. So more broadly, I think the first question I was going to ask really links our previous discussions together, because in terms of making buildings smarter, I mean, I just wanted to ask you this question, whether it's possible to, because the way the technology is developing, and much more intensive and better, you know, 5G type communication and 5G enabled buildings means that it ought to be much easier relatively to collect data from sensors and to make sensors more easily installable in older buildings.
Absolutely.
Where the structures don't need to be ripped apart to do that. And I know that there is technology under development for sensors which will essentially power themselves by extracting some energy from the radio beams as well, which is very interesting technology, which I heard about actually from the head of Microsoft about 10 years ago. And I haven't actually seen whether it's developed yet, but I mean, I suspect that'll be the way things are going. In which case, this seems to me to be an area where at a policy level, we should be taking intense interest. And in terms of what we were talking about refitting buildings, that actually having standards for new buildings and refit buildings, which basically put in place the sort of smart building networks from the beginning, seems to be rather important. And that's, I mean, I'm an engineer as well, so I mean that's my background. But it seems to me that we're not paying anything like enough attention to the standards framework that at a policy level we should be encouraging if we're really going to make progress on our circular economy targets. I mean, it isn't going to be happen on its own without some heavyweight facilitation.
I think it's the next step from the metering that's in building regulations now.
Yeah.
You know, it wasn't in 20, 30 years ago. You now have to meter all of your data to all of your energy to different uses, so you know where your energy is going. I see that as the place, you know, in the building regulations to say, and you've got to count it, you've got to measure it, you've got to have the.
Yeah.
It's more information, really. Again, you know, that's why you meter. You meter in the hopes that someone's looking at the data, because really metering and sensing and smart gives you nothing unless you look at it.
Yeah.
So it's either written into the way that, you know, we do the display energy certificates and the kind of building certification, that you take the real metrics of that data, or that there's some policy that you have to act on changes in that data. You know, if your energy level slips by a certain percentage, you're fined effectively. You know, there's some penalty for doing that, which keeps you on top of your maintenance, and keeps you looking at that data to find advantages. But hopefully, as energy becomes more expensive, the cost of not doing it becomes the stick to get people further, quicker down the journey.
They may need some incentive on top of that. I mean, what I'm saying is, if we've set a challenge, a decarbonising challenge with an end date on it, as a global challenge.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I don't think governments can just sit back and assume that higher energy prices are going to drive sensible behaviour.
No, I think that is optimistic, but I think,
You know, I mean, I'm not sure people will use their cars significantly less because they have to pay more for petrol. Going back to your commuting argument. But anyway, I mean, the link I wanted to make was that I think that you also illustrated how important the proper transport planning is.
Yeah.
In terms of evolving communities. And the problem is that a lot of the heavyweight investment in transport is relatively inflexible. Whereas, you know, and if it doesn't really work very well. I mean, there's an interesting example in Milton Keynes where Connected Places has 2 headquarters. And when Milton Keynes was built, it had a fantastic network of cycleways built into it. The problem is a lot of them go into dark places undergrounds, and they go in areas which are not where actually they're quite sort of remote areas. So you find that despite this network of cycling, I mean, the level of people using them in a city like Milton Keynes is not very high now.
Yeah.
Because society has changed. And now that your flexibility point is really significant in this respect, and I think we have to do more about that. And so the flows of people and data. So linking into your move to the city centre will be that more of your staff, though, because of their experience of remote working, wanting to work 1 or 2 days from home, and they're people like me who live out in Solihull, or David and I, Solihull or Warwickshire, because we rather like living there and we don't mind commuting into Birmingham. We'd like a better train service, but actually our occupancy of the building might be less than you'd originally planned to begin with.
yes, yeah, so we have plans. So we have 90,000 square feet in Blythe Valley, and we have 67,000 square feet in the city centre. So we've assumed quite an intense, well, the opposite of intense, but a strong utilisation. So we've only got 50% of desks to the number of staff that we employ. So everyone can't come in on the same day. We have a work unbound policy in terms of flexible working. So our staff, as a minimum, have to do 2 days in their home office. They don't have to do every day in their home office. We can't fit everyone in. So we are assuming a slight change in culture, with some working from home involved, partly to limit that. And we are trying to, you know, all of our rooms are hybrid enabled. You know, do we need to travel to London for a meeting? You know, every employee in Arup has a carbon footprint that we try and keep all of our staff within. You can't just fly to Australia for a meeting, even if you are a director without like board approval, because of the carbon that's taking up from the whole of Arup. You know, like, yes, some of the directors are probably allowed a bit more carbon than our young apprentices who is expected not to go to Australia, but there is an expectation that we do have a moral. We do have to keep within a tolerance. You know, we can't just keep spending carbon. You know, and as a business, it's important to us that we walk the walk, and we try and keep our staff to, you know, we don't travel first class unless someone's working on legal. There are a couple of exceptions. If you're working on a legal case and you go in with a lawyer, you're allowed to go first class, but it's lower carbon to travel in the carriages with more seats, and therefore that's what we want our staff to do, not from a, you know, for many reasons, but so I think I think more and more organisations, though, are starting to understand that and put these policies in place. And I think that will start to drive policies at a higher level.
Yeah. Well, so I suppose the final question is, what are you going to be doing about repurposing the Solihull building, which is an extremely interesting building. I mean, I've been in many times in terms of its engineering.
Yeah.
I mean,
So
lots, presumably you've learned a lot from it, presumably in terms of, because it was quite an early new striking design. And what should we be repurposing it for? I mean, should it be our training centre for industrial symbiosis? I mean, it would be rather good for a training centre.
So
I mean, you could put that on your project list straight away.
yeah. I mean, it's not owned by Arup, so our
We designed it though.
we did indeed. We did design it,
You know
but
everything about it.
we know everything about it. We designed it to be demountable, so it can be taken down and unbolted, and the steel reused, and the different bits of structure be reused. We are trying to work with the landlord to find out what the plans are, because obviously we've got housing to the right of us, and we've got warehouses to the left of us. And whilst there could be opportunities to turn our building into accommodation, it'd be difficult for it to be turned into a big warehouse, you know. So we need to continue those discussions with the developer. We are also talking to them in terms of DLAPs and not throwing carbon down the drain by, you know, actually engaging in DLAPs on the building when if they are gonna knock it down. You know, we want to have sensible discussions about that. And before, I think developers would have said, fix it. We want it back to how we leased it 25 years ago, without necessarily thinking about what the next use is. So we are trying to have those discussions. But Mark Jones, who you met previously, might know a little bit more than I do. But as yet, I don't think the owner has quite decided what they're doing with the building. But we are trying to influence. I think the lady in the corner had a hand.
Hi, so I had a couple of points and questions. One was, I'm Beck Collins, I'm from Sustainability West Midlands. Before I joined Sustainability West Midlands last week, I've just been in higher education for the past 10, 12 years, working at Birmingham City University in the Faculty for Computing Engineering and the Built Environment. So we had quite a few of these conversations before about some of the ethical implications of the digital space and about this Internet of Things and the huge amounts of data that comes with it. And I do share some of my peers' concerns here about how that data will be used. And I wondered, thinking constructively, is there something that maybe this working group or the Innovation Alliance could do in terms of starting to do some work about putting together some standards or code of practice about how to use the data that might come out of these sorts of projects, which could potentially be then put forward to government consultation for DCMS if one came up or became relevant, or could perhaps the combined authority have some kind of voluntary charter that organisations might sign up to, using this code of conduct to use data ethically and appropriately to try and constructively deal with some of these problems. Because colleague at the end here is quite right. We don't want to take a Facebook move fast and break things approach here. We are kind of moving into a new space, and there are all sorts of potential downsides that perhaps being engineers are so excited about what can be done here, we don't often consider. So that was one comment. Also, because my former employer, Birmingham City University, have gone through a process themselves of building lots of big new shiny buildings as they've expanded their campus in the city centre. They've also been playing with ideas around building management systems and more smart enabled buildings. And some of the conversations that came out of that was about the standardization of the parameters of comfort within the building, and whether or not there are perhaps any challenges to that, because of course the build, don't touch the building, don't touch it, you might break it. The people who are in charge of the smart systems, they will deal with everything, and they will set all of the parameters, and they will look at the data. And sometimes that doesn't always allow for sort of a diversity of comfort. I'm actually not an engineer, I'm a social scientist, and so I'm quite interested in how people who use buildings actually perceive them and how they feel comfortable in them. So I think my question to you, Alison, is will there be an opportunity for Arup to engage with its staff when they move into this new building and try and take on board perhaps some of the feedback that staff might give you about personalisation, about diversification of comfort.
Definitely, and feedback and occupant satisfaction kind of data is really important to us in moving into the new building. And one of the things we've discussed, and as building services engineers is key to my heart, is we can all be in the same environment. Someone will have a jumper on, someone will have 2 jumpers on and be a bit chilly, someone will be sweating in the corner. You can't get it right. And actually having, we have talked about, this won't be day one, but we could have cooler and warmer areas of the office. So they're all within a tolerance. But you know what? If you're a bit more comfortable, 1 degree warmer, because sometimes it's that little bit, isn't it, that just makes the difference to your productivity, to your well-being. Yeah. And we could say to people, if you're generally, colder blooded, that's the corner. Go sit there. That's our warm corner. And this is our slightly chillier corner. We're talking minutiae of, we're not talking 30 degrees and 10 degrees here. We are talking 22 and 21 type thing. But we have talked about that as something that we will trial to see what outputs we get, because some of that comes down to energy saving. At what point does it become too cold? At what point are people going, this isn't acceptable now. Now I'm putting my gloves on to type my email. And just because we'll have control and because we'll have the data, we can say, right, we're trialing this in this area, guys. And you can come up with a warning on the room booking system, desk booking. If you book here, by the way, set point is 21, the rest of the office is 22. People make a choice to sit there. And if people make a choice to sit there, then it's worked. If they don't, it's too cold.
I think that's right. A really interesting point about variability for personification. But I think what kind of conflicts with that is my understanding is most people are currently planning for hybrid working environments where they optimise the space to be totally efficient. Like you've just said about your own building, we couldn't actually have all the staff in at once, right? Because we've actually, and Bupa are the same. So they've reduced their footprint in, because I was at Bupa for a couple of years. So I've referenced them and it was an issue with them. And they've reduced their floor space so they cannot hold all their staff at one time. In fact, when they get up to about 40% staff in the building, there ain't no person, there's no personalisation because there's no choice. Right? There is what there is. So I do think it's really interesting how you interplay efficiency drives to get the optimum usage of the space, coupled with hybrid working practices, because I work at home because we can save money and you've been at home, and and then what that actually means for the choice that you have in an open office workspace.
We are also looking at activity-based working. So if you come in to collaborate, you're in a collaboration space and you don't need a desk at that point. So for the morning, you don't have a desk, and you might not have a desk the whole day you're in the office because you actually go from collaboration area to project room to meeting room, and that's your day. I think our office currently in Blythe Valley, talking pre-COVID, we've done signs of life surveys and various occupancy surveys, and our occupancy was peaking at kind of 60%, signs of life slightly higher. So whilst we are making a big cut by physically not having the chairs for people, the kind of we're close to having what was needed anyway. You know what I mean? We haven't taken as big a step as it sounds but it is taking away the identity a little bit. You don't come in to your desk. This isn't my desk that I come to Monday to Friday. I can have stuff in a locker that I can put my photo of my children on my desk whilst I work there. But I move that photo when I move my laptop into the project room. I don't take up space for no benefit. I move where I'm needed, and it will be a cultural piece and a change piece that we need to go through within the organisation to change that mentality that you don't come in and stick your coat on the back of a chair. because it isn't your chair. You know, some people will have chairs, and we're going to track the chairs using smart data, so we know where they are for people with ergonomic chairs. But normal chairs are not yours. They are a chair, and just because you've come in doesn't mean you get a chair. If that, you do, but it might just not be at a desk. So I hope, and if we've got it right, we have got space for that personalisation, and what we are looking at different furniture solutions. We haven't got a blanket set of furniture. We're looking at different furniture solutions to try and engage with people of different neurodiversities and provide them with a working space that gives them the opportunity to do the task they've come in the day to do it. So we've got kitchen table type spaces where you're closer and more engaged with others on that table. So for a project day where you've come in to collaborate, that's where you can sit. If you had a meeting in the morning but you need to write a report in the afternoon, we've got desks with partitions, so you can head down, get the report done, and then go home. So we're trying to provide personalisation in a different way to the traditional form, which is going to take some getting used to, but I think we're trying to make the office suit better what you've come in to do, because everyone's used to their home now, which, you know, they can change, they can turn the heating on, they can really make it the way they want it. You know, if you need a nice, neat space, you make it neat. If you don't care, you can sit on your bed. It doesn't matter. And so we can't go quite that flexible and provide beds, but we are trying to provide people with the type of space that might suit their personality and their working style.
We'll have one final question, then we're going to move on to in the final 30 minutes just to do a round table, just to make sure everybody knows who everyone in the room is.
Well, my name is Tony McNally from Climate Change Solutions, although we have the wonderful Heart of England solar farm on your patch at Stratford-on-Avon, as you probably know. We have 100,000 solar panels altogether, biggest community energy project in the country. But we've started to look at mapping for Coventry, and Beata started in Birmingham at the Tyseley site for the potential of solar on large south-facing roofs, flat roofs, and associated car parks. And incidentally, we have some material here on some of the facts and information that we've done. What it shows, two things. One is the potential for, if you project it for Coventry, it's about 1 million solar panels. If you project it for Birmingham, 3 million. If you project it for the West Midlands, it's 12 to 15 million. But what is very, very striking is the vast numbers of buildings that don't have any solar at all. After all the discussions and resolutions and conferences and so on. And we feel really this is, we've got to find some way of trying to promote the new opportunities, particularly as the Prime Minister has eventually just lifted VAT off solar. Should have been done years ago, and also the price of energy. So solar power is now the cheapest, second cheapest energy in the country. So, but when you're mapping, it is just so striking, even for new buildings, not a single solar panel. It's a very, very simple thing. And I'm very pleased, and I have worked with Arup for many years in all your buildings, in Birmingham and so on, even in London. Peter Head, who designed the first zero carbon city of spin-off or from Shanghai, a new town without transport. But we have not got this into the mainstream. And I'm really very impressed by what Alison has done and Arup are doing. But the real big challenge in the climate emergency, how can we try to get this into the mainstream to try to implement it, both with the new, but more importantly, with the buildings that we've got now, which will 80% will be still here by 2050, how to retrofit these buildings. And I'm just coming up here, I see some old factory buildings, several stories high. They've been gutted. but tendency is to knock them down and put up these sort of thing. And the real challenge is how can you retrofit those buildings so you keep the fabric, basic fabric, and you retrofit it in a clean, renewable, smart way. But sadly, we have not yet managed to get this into the mainstream of whether planning people, the contractors, the owners of these properties, and I think this is a very big challenge for us.
It's definitely a challenge. I think as the regulations get tighter and tighter, we design buildings and we can't achieve satisfactory results. Clients do want to move into an energy conscious building. They can't always afford everything, which is why some things get VE'd out and the solar panels go. But if that means that their building energy certificate is poor, I think there's more kind of consideration now that no, that's we've got to get an EPC of at least maybe a B. So you wouldn't go below that because it looks like a bad building. No one wants to be associated with it. And so as the kind of social responsibility weight comes into the argument, things that we're looking at now, clients are saying, we've got to have CO2 sensors, we've got to have air quality monitoring because of COVID. But it's because their staff won't come back unless they've got it. Their people won't be excited about the building unless it's got, and it used to be a BREEAM badge, but if the certification and the credentials of buildings fall into an energy market, it's going to come down to things like having PV or having ground source heat pump or whatever it might be, something that, it sounds bad, ticks a box, because and that's one of the problems is you can tick boxes in quite grey ways, and that's what people have been doing. But the more we clarify that to stop that happening, then the better.
We've spent a lot of time today thinking about how this functions in large buildings or with large organizations, and I'm curious to sort of throw this to the floor for those of you who don't work in large organizations, including the Combined Authority and Arup. What are some of your thoughts on this, and how, as Alison was saying, we have ambitions and we want things to be sustainable and smart, but then at the end of the day, those things cost money. So when you're making those decisions, for those of you who aren't in larger organizations, how are you weighing the costs and the benefits? And to Beck's point a moment ago as well, I loved your idea of proposing that perhaps the Smart Places working group or some of the membership in this working group could think through standards or a code of conduct for data. I wonder if there's perhaps another piece of work that some of the network could do around a bit of what Repurposing to Zero was looking to do with what Jordan was describing. How do you do this? What are the first couple of steps? How do you look at digitization? How do you look at sustainability? And then how do you make decisions, costs and benefits across the line that way? So I just wanted to throw that out as a kind of a thing to think through when we move into this next segment of the event to wrap up. We've lost most of our online audience. We have 2 people still with us. So to Hannah and Lachlan, thank you very much for staying with us. If you are still there, either of you, we would love to hear from you with a quick introduction, who you are, what organization you're with, and either a key takeaway from today or just a little nugget or food for thought that you'd like to share. And we've got about 20 minutes to kind of go through everybody. So if either of you are there online, would you like to pop up a hand? Otherwise, we'll go for in-person people. Okay, we've got, oh, Hannah, hello, yes, welcome.
Hello, I am actually here, and I've been listening, and it's been a really interesting discussion. So thank you. I'm Hannah Smith. I also work at Arup with Alison. My job title is Climate Services and Sustainable Development Delivery Lead for our Midlands office. So my job is mostly trying to help all of our technical teams understand a bit more about sustainability and embed it more in their day-to-day work. I really enjoyed Jordan's talk, particularly about reuse. It's something we're talking about a lot, trying to work out kind of how does retrofit work. And we're really interested in the feasibility study. So we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Hannah. And Lachlan, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Just a lot.
Wonderful. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. I'm Lukman Lajal, and I work at Siemens as sales. I'm overseeing the portfolio for renewable energies, and it has been a really interesting conversation here. Sorry, I'm in the an office, and it's an open space. There is some noise behind me. Yeah, I mean, especially the bits about presented by Arup about the new era of how to build those working spaces, how to share them between employees, and how we allocate resources in the most efficient way. It doesn't matter like it's going to come tomorrow, like everywhere or in the next 20 years, but it is the future of how we going to organize workspace, I believe. And thank you, everyone.
Thank you for that. Thank you for joining us, to both of you who stayed with us online the whole time.
Cheers. No, it was a true pleasure.
So shall we do our round robin around the room here? Would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, I'm Simon Kinvig. I'm from Pegasus Group. So we're a big sort of multidisciplinary group that deal a lot with planning. I thought it was quite interesting. Thank you very much for some of the talks we've had today. We've just been doing a sort of big project out in Stratford-upon-Avon, a big refurb of a building for a charity. And we've come up against some of the various different points that have been raised today. Really quite interesting. We also deal with photovoltaics and planning for that up and down the country. And what we're finding in terms of just picking up on a few points that were dealt with recently is with existing buildings, it can be a planning policy potential problem. That's a lot of P's, sorry. But we're finding that there's obviously a certain amount of when you're retrofitting a new building, there's a view that this building needs to be very protected. Things that are going to be on the external face of facade is going to be sort of sacrilege. And can we line the inside, you know, belts and braces, everything like that. And so, yeah, when we've been looking at how we're dealing with various different existing buildings, that's the way we've been coming at it. I'm really interested to sort of, I've made a lot of notes, to be honest, Alison, from your talk about the sort of smart ready and how that works, because I was sort of partly trained as a bit of an M&E engineer, but sort of went down the architectural route in the end, which doesn't normally happen actually. But yeah, it was just really interesting to understand. Obviously, you guys are coming at it from a service point of view where you can monitor these various different bits. We have a lot of clients that would be really interested in that, but it's how do they interface with this sort of data that we can collect. We've got various different sensors that are put in. You know, you've got your BMS systems, various bits like that we can look at. But in terms of things like the maintenance and the paint, the furniture and bits, I think that's really interesting because it's things that really aren't picked up a lot in buildings. But yeah, we all come across and we're all constantly trying to refresh different buildings. And the first thing we do is let's rip out the carpet or various bits like that. And it's really interesting to get into that nitty gritty because I think that's where a lot of embedded energy and various bits can be saved. So yeah, that was some of my points really. I was also going to say, yeah, a few years ago, I was involved in getting the Birmingham Architectural Association up and going, and I sort of did a sort of stint of presidency within that. And we were really interested when I was sort of holding a lot of group talks at that point, that actually looking back at buildings and how they're performing is not something that's just come about, and it's obviously our IBA stages sort of 7 onwards that we're looking at, but it has been in the RIBA stages in code of work for quite some time, but it's often something that really people just think, you know, the keys are handed over, let's move on. And so really it would be great to have an impact back in that in terms of how we're dealing with these key stages and looking at buildings. and how they're monitored. But I'm really interested in how that data is fed back to clients that aren't necessarily our engineers and various bits, and how they can respond to that, because I think that's really where a lot of difference can be made. But
I think there are, so Arup, we are a bit unique. So we have platforms that we've developed in-house to read this data and all sorts of things, and I'm not going to do a sales pitch for them, but just like there are BMS providers that do your graphics that everyone understands, there are now smart building providers that can come in and kind of give you a system, and they give you effectively that graphical interface that with that AI in there, that learning that can tell you the outputs. Yes, it is just as transparent as the data we're getting, but they choose the things they're going to show you, so that for a lay client, they get the useful things. They have thought through some of these processes. So I think in the next 2-3 years, just like you'll have an X BMS system, and some of them are open protocol and some of them are closed, that the same will happen with smart, and you will have one system that, if you're a single building owner, you choose the cheapest. If you've got multiple buildings you want to string together, you think about how they can talk to each other and all of those things. But I think it will become a package. It will become a package. And because we're at the beginning of this journey, and because we're a bit weird and Arup, we've got different dashboards and different platforms that we're considering that we wouldn't have to if we hadn't developed some of them ourselves. There are proprietary products on the market which are starting to do some of this for occupiers and owners. So it's not quite as hard to penetrate as perhaps it even was a year ago, kind of thing. It's moving so quickly that I think more and more is coming to the market to help.
I think Centenary Way it's a really interesting sort of proposition, isn't it? Because really there's such a big quarter of the city, well, not a quarter, but a big parcel of land has been released in the middle of a city, where actually that doesn't really happen very often.
No.
And if we're all seeing various different next phases coming online, and wouldn't it be brilliant if we could start plugging into those and how that works then as a network of buildings? And it's all scalability, isn't it? And when these things start scaling up, that's when they really can take effect. But thank you very much for today.
Hi everyone, my name is Jay. I'm also an architect at Pegasus Group, working with colleague Simon here. I'm just going to keep it short, to be fair. It's been a really interesting discussion, especially learning about smart buildings and things like that. I think a lot of the discussion has been around sort of new components and new systems and things like that. I think it's good to understand also the non-smart aspects, which we can get in easy wins of. So things like building to passive principles, even if it's not passive house standard, we can still bring those principles in. So things like size and positions of windows and things like that, I think can easily reduce load in terms of energy usage in a building, rather than going from a systems approach from the outset. You go from a sort of principled approach from the start. And then also, I think Simon touched on it as well, in terms of once we've gathered that data, REBA stages 6, 7, etc., feeding that back in and closing that loop, and it fits back into Jordan, your conversation in terms of being circular. I think that has to happen with everything, like information in terms of how that's fed back and how that affects the next phase of changes and things like that. I think is really important. But also, things from the policy side in terms of it not being an obligation to do that is an issue. Once it becomes an obligation, at least once the information's fed back, at least we've got a chance for people to review it. And a lot of the time that just does not happen. So yeah, I think it's really interesting to see where the missing parts are and how we can gain from that as well. So, yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Hi everybody, my name is Dal Rajnidhi, you can call me Dal for short. So I am co-founder, Chief Commercial Officer of Concrete for Change. And what we're doing is we're developing technology to permanently sequester CO2 within concrete. So we recently won the UN COP26 award for being the most innovative net zero project, which was fantastic for us in terms of PR. And so I'm particularly interested in sustainable building materials as a result, as you could probably tell. And for those of you who don't know, concrete in and of itself has the ability to sequester up to 30% of its weight by CO2. And so what we're trying to do is basically accelerate the lifetime carbonation of a concrete building from 100 years, which is painfully slow, to 100 hours. How we're doing that is we've developed a carrier, basically an additive material, which has an affinity to bind with CO2, and then we transfer that into concrete, and the CO2 is stored forever. So even if a building was to be demolished, it wouldn't leak. We're also looking at potential IP around recycling concrete as well and upcycling it. So for potential buildings that do get demolished, for example, can we reuse the aggregates and the concrete that we get from those buildings? Because already carbonated to some extent, usually 5 to 10%, introduce more carbon into that BRR technology, and then reuse that for a number of different applications, whether that's a new building in the same place or somewhere else. That's also something that we're looking at. So whilst I'm not as digitally focused as kind of other guys have been talking about, I'm really passionate about using or creating circularity with regards to the building materials that we're using. I think that's really important in terms of the means of production. I think that's probably the hard work that needs to be done as well. And hopefully our solution is one of those that can help with that. And so I'm particularly interested in small scale pilots with yourselves, maybe even Arup potentially in the future, where we can showcase how this can work. So we're a very, very young startup. We're still at the proof of concept stage, so I can't sell anything right now, but I'm very hopeful with good partnerships through the combined authority and the network of partners, we can showcase that this can work, at least at a very, very small feasibility level or pilot level, and then slowly start to scale that up over time. So yeah, that's kind of a nutshell. But yeah, thank you for the information. It's really, really useful. I think we're very aligned on how we can make things really sustainable, not just at the kind of also digital level, but also hopefully at the means of production level, which is something I'm more interested in. In terms of how our technology will hopefully work in the future in terms of the commercial level, which I own in my business, it's we're trying to license our technology to the big concrete manufacturers. So you may have heard of Hanson, you may have worked with Hanson before, Breeden Group, Tarmac, people like that, who then use our technology to cast concrete, whether it be for big buildings or pavements, roads, for example. So yeah, that's the long-term roadmap. But in the meantime, we'd really love to explore potential pilots or feasibility studies with yourselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Khora Mahmood and I'm part of the West Midlands Young Combined Authority. So I'm one of the leading board members and I attend probably 6 or 7 committee boards and I take the views of my board and work collaboratively. So I thought I'll attend as an observer today and see where we can contribute. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think I introduced myself earlier, but my particular focus in Connected Places is actually on getting the procurement system to work far better in delivering innovative and sustainable outcomes, which is why I was very interested in issues around standards. I mean, I think the Centenary Square building and the changes you described is a really good example about how a smart customer in procuring a building can fundamentally influence the direction of that building and its sustainability. Now, I mean, given the amount of investment that public authorities make in buildings and how many buildings they own, so in the combined authority at the moment, across the West Midlands, there's a big drive towards improving social housing and the environmental performance of social housing. I mean, that's an absolutely classic project where procurement and how procurement is managed is going to be absolutely crucial. What sort of standards are we going to set for that decarbonisation process? Are we going to set some funding aside, which is really going to drive innovative solutions? I'd love to know more about your sustainable concrete, because that seems to be one of the biggest challenges we have in decarbonising construction. The public authorities and public money is, the amount that public bodies invest in buildings And the outcomes we get are frankly appalling. I mean, it's not, you know, the public authorities are not taking sustainability seriously enough. And they can use the tendering process itself to get what they want, because they have to design the procurement process from the very beginning. So to decide what standards they want and what outcomes they want, and how they're going to evaluate the tenders in terms of cost versus sustainable outcomes, which you can do in public tendering. You know, the idea that public procurement is simply just going out and buying things at the cheapest price is long gone.
There is a West Midlands Innovation Programme pilot that's about to start called, the acronym is DIPS, Digital Innovation in Public Services. Ian's been involved in getting that together, and it's focused exactly on what you're talking about there.
No, I've not been involved in it directly, but I mean, we need a similar one for sustainability, surely. Or actually, we shouldn't necessarily just put this as what I asked you earlier. As soon as you start to put a digital label on, people will sort of think differently about it. You know, I mean, digital is embedded in everything. Anyway, sorry, I better not make another political speech.
David?
Okay, I'm David Brown. I now work with a number of universities, but I was previously chief exec of the professional body for chemical engineers, where, just to be provocative, we encourage people to think about the whole system in terms of impact. So I'm just wondering whether we really know the difference between the carbon impact of having 10 people who've travelled into a high-tech building because they value the serendipitous, impromptu conversations that are vital to innovation and which no tech in the world can reproduce, compared to having those 10 people all in their individual, poorly insulated, non-retrofitted homes with their gas-fired central heating blasting away because it's too cold to work otherwise. I'd love to see that comparison.
Holistic approach, David.
Craig, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Carl Sylvester. I'm a communications assistant at the Innovation Alliance for the West Midlands. Just short and sweet, I think that one is.
Hello, I introduced myself already, but I'm Beck Collins from Sustainability West Midlands. Sustainability West Midlands help businesses, decision makers, communities across the West Midlands region on their sustainability journey. They do research, stakeholder engagement, strategy advice, and so on. I've only recently joined, and I'm trying to sort of just keep myself in the SWM box, because everything that everyone's been talking about here today, I've thought, oh yes, that sounds really interesting. Oh yes, that sounds really interesting. So I'll leave it there. Cheers.
Hi, my name's Wayne Hawken. I'm CTO of a cybersecurity firm. I have an interest in how built environment and smart working, smart places integrate with that.
Hi, I'm Beate Pessian. I'm the founder, co-owner of a company called Worksmith. We are basically recruitment consultants with a special interest in sustainability and green energy. Members of SWM as well, proudly. So we bring the people component into the smart and non-smart buildings, let's say, and we concentrate on placing sustainability managers into any business to kind of forge the conversation about sustainability, and we're helping people into these careers. So I'm also project manager volunteering for CCS at the moment. Tony can tell more about it. Working with a few students, very enthusiastic students, and kind of volunteering, mapping TEED, so the area in Tyseley that's called TEED now, Enterprise Development Area, Tyseley and East Birmingham, and the students are using an open source system called Open Solar, mapping every roof that they can identify, and we are just really planning and starting the conversation with the stakeholders that are using those roofs, businesses in Tyseley, and we just want to start the conversation, facilitate the information. What do I need to finally have solar on my roof? So all of this information the students are researching, gathering the information of the financing of those solar panels, how do I speak and engage with my landlord? What do I do to actually save money and install solar on my roof? So that's the big mission that we are on, and the area has been mapped and the data is being uploaded, and we are ready to start the conversations now.
No, I'm still Tony McNally from Climate Change Solutions. So, but a pleasure to be in such wonderful company.
We don't need to go again, do we? No.
That was brilliant. We've got 3 minutes now until we wrap. So thank you very much, everyone, for keeping that succinct. I suppose I'll let you all know we do have the room until 4 o'clock. So if anybody wants to stay and chat and network at all, you're more than welcome to do so. A huge thank you to Jordan and Alison for sharing today and just sharing your insights. It's been insightful insights, sagacious sagacity, I suppose. The final thing that we like to do with the Smart Places Working Group meeting as we're wrapping up is just to think through any actions that have come out of this. So I think Malcolm and Dal, you're probably going to follow up for a conversation about concrete bridging, which is exciting, and then Simon potentially to get connected into a conversation with Alison and Jay as well. And then Beck, obviously you're brand new to Sustainability West Midlands, so we are not going to expect you to spearhead anything your first week in your role. But you did bring up this idea about potentially a code of conduct or a code of practice. So if anybody is interested in that and being part of that, please do get in touch with me and let me know, and I'll see if I can facilitate some sort of meeting between you all and just kind of get you all connected to each other. The Smart Places Working Group membership would run that, just to confirm that that wouldn't be me as the convener driving forward and following you up and chasing up for actions and things. So it's very much a self-governed type of situation. So if anybody has any questions or comments or concerns after the meeting, please do let me know. I am planning to send through an event summary in the next couple of days before the bank holiday weekend. If you do not want me to include quick notes about your introduction, please just grab me for a second afterwards, ideally not physically, and I'll make note not to include you in the write-up there. But otherwise, thank you very much again for coming and joining us. Thank you for sharing your perspectives, and we're looking forward to seeing what comes out of these discussions. So thank you again. Have a lovely afternoon, and thank you to the two of you who stayed with us online the whole time. We're troopers.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Yes.
Thank you something. Yeah,
Okay.
if I may.
No, that's quite all right. Yeah.